Hey, it's Dave here. Welcome to another video on digestive system testing. And in this video, we're going to talk about the relative pros and cons of the endoscopy procedures that so many people have to try and figure out what's going on in the digestive system. So the endoscopy is where you kind of have a tube with a camera either put down your throat, down your esophagus and into your stomach. And that's called a gastroscopy. And also there's a colonoscopy where you have the tube inserted into the rectum and the doctors have a good look around the lower part of your digestive system. And as I said, these tests have both benefits and drawbacks. The main benefits are that they can find some really significant problems in the digestive system. They wouldn't be used if they weren't helpful and beneficial. But the main drawback, as we're going to briefly chat about, is the fact that all the conditions that these endoscopies find have an underlying cause. And so while the test might find the condition, it doesn't necessarily tell us what's causing that condition. So when they do these tests, particularly let's start with the gastroscopy, what they're looking for with this camera that they shove down is they're looking for structural damage to the tissues in the upper part of the digestive system. So they're going to find things like esophagitis, and esophagitis is inflammation of the esophagus. And that can develop into something called Barrett's esophagitis or Barrett's esophagus. And Barrett's esophagus is where the cell structure actually starts to change. And in some people that can go on and lead to esophageal cancer. So it can be very helpful to find out whether there's inflammation in the esophagus and what level that inflammation has reached. But again, the problem with that is we still need to ask the question, why has the esophagus become inflamed? It's no good just giving treatment for the inflammation. We really need to figure out what's going on to cause that in the first place. Now, the same's true for gastritis and atrophic gastritis. So gastritis is inflammation of the stomach lining. And atrophic gastritis is where that inflammation has gone on for a long time and it's led to the wearing away or the atrophy of the stomach lining. And when that happens, it can really compromise stomach function. It can cause a lot of problems. But again, why is that happening? It's not good enough to just say, okay, Mr. Jones, you have atrophic gastritis. That's it. We want to know why that's happened over time. And for example, one of the reasons atrophic gastritis can develop is due to H. pylori infections. Same with gastritis as well. So the next thing that the endoscopy or the gastroscopy can find is ulcers. And you can have ulcers in your stomach. They're called gastric or peptic ulcers. Or you can have duodenal ulcers in the upper part of the small intestine as well. And they can be caused by H. pylori. So again, it's no good just saying you have an ulcer. Well, you know, what's causing the ulcer? The thing about ulcers is that they're not all caused by H. pylori. The scientific literature strongly suggests that many people have ulcers even though they don't have H. pylori. And it goes back to that whole belief system that came about or that was prevalent before H. pylori was linked with ulcers, which is basically that stress can cause ulcers, and it still seems that that's absolutely true. So we find an ulcer, we can treat the ulcer, but then, you know, what are we going to do to stop it coming back? What are the underlying factors behind it? Just segueing across here, when they put the camera down the throat or up through the rectum, they can take a biopsy as well. That's a small snip of tissue from the structures within the digestive system to do some further investigation on that tissue to see if anything else is going on. So one of the things that they can do when they take a biopsy from the stomach is they can look and test it for H. pylori. If they take a biopsy from the small intestine, they can test for celiac disease. They can look and see if the intestinal structure has been compromised. And that's a really good way of confirming celiac disease if people have blood tests that suggest celiac disease might be present as well. And so we've got a whole range of different conditions that these tests can actually detect right already, which is fantastic. In terms of specifics of the colonoscopy, well, the colonoscopy can find things like colon polyps, which may be precancerous in some people, may develop into cancer as well. And it can find things like inflammatory bowel diseases. So it can be used to check for lesions, ulcers, and inflammatory patterns that are found in things like colitis, Crohn's disease, and diverticulitis as well. So very useful in that regard. But we still have to answer the question, if somebody has inflammatory bowel disease or colon polyps, why? What is it about that person that is leading to that dysfunction in the colon? And that's a really important question to answer, because many of these diseases are deemed to be incurable by the medical system, but we've worked with these conditions and we found that they can be completely gotten rid of. And so there's a mismatch there between what I believe is the truth and what the doctors tell people. And so we've got to be concerned about why all of these conditions develop, and not just be content with the notion that we have this certain condition, this disease, and we have to live with it for the rest of our lives. And then finally, obviously one of the things that concerns many people if they're feeling a lot of discomfort in the digestive system is, could I have some form of cancer? And so these endoscopies, colonoscopies, etc. can obviously be absolutely wonderful in helping to find cancers and tumours or precancerous lesions, and that can be cut off before it starts to develop into something more serious. So that's the endoscopy. It has huge benefits from being able to allow doctors to diagnose certain medical conditions, but the drawback is it's still not really getting to the underlying cause of the problem. So if you have an ulcer, it explains why you might have heartburn and a lot of discomfort in your stomach, but you don't understand why necessarily the ulcer is there. And so my job is to help people and people in my industry, the more natural alternative health industry, functional medicine, whatever you want to call it, is to try and figure out, if you have been diagnosed with something like this, why is that actually happening? So I hope this has been helpful. In the next video, we'll explore some different types of medical testing. We'll look at ultrasounds, and then in the video after that we'll look at scanning techniques and look at the benefits and drawbacks of those methods as well. So as I say, I hope this has been helpful, and I'll catch you on the next video. Cheers.